Okay, I am going to read you the invitation. I could introduce Jeff as my friend and what I know about him, but I'm going to make sure I don't miss anything, and I'm going to actually tell you that Jeff is the Vice President for Business and Technology Strategy for Acceler, Inc. It's a US-based management consulting firm, and they're enabling strategy execution excellence. He works with Fortune 1000 companies on a wide variety of consulting engagements, including strategy development, business architecture, organizational change, and innovation management. Before he was at Acceler, he was principal analyst with Forrester, and that's where a lot of us first met Jeff, in this town anyway, and he established Forrester's business architecture practice and published over 50 research reports and numerous articles. So Jeff is internationally recognized thought leader in the areas of business architecture, IT leadership, organizational innovation, and I think more things. He frequently speaks, writes, and teaches. He has a Master of Arts degree in learning and experimental psychology. So, watch what you say. When you talk to him, I always, psychologists. Be careful, I might get in a chair somewhere. From Wake Forest University, Jeff currently writes the blog, The Business Architect, which everyone should subscribe to because it's really got some good meaty stuff in it. So, my friend Jeff Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, sure is a lot nicer to be here now than January, which was the last time I was here. I feel like I'm going to have to get over somewhere out of the light, it feels like here. So I have a couple of questions for you. How many of you today, in the room today are consultants? Wow, okay. Now we know that you're a consultant, you know how to raise your hand, so the next question's not for you. Put your hands down. How many of you work for an organization that wants business architecture? And by that, I mean that they are willing to put the financial resources behind it that it pretty much needs, and more importantly, they are willing to put the political capital behind it to make sure that it actually works across the organization. So how many of you are in that organization? All right, more than in the last place I talked, so that's pretty good. It's no fair, you guys, yeah. Your boss is sitting here, you gotta raise your hands. Yeah, the political capital. Well, so how many of you are getting the political capital you need? Good point, maybe. I got some maybes out here, some maybes, okay. Second question. So which is harder? Is it building out the business architecture artifacts, or is it getting it implemented in the organization? So in other words, is it harder to build capability models, strategy maps, value chains, all that kind of stuff? Or is it harder to motivate the organization to kind of buy into this thing and embrace it and use it? So how many of you think that it's harder to build the artifacts? Now, that answer is pretty interesting because for the last 4 years, I've been asking architects, enterprise architects and business architects, that question. And here's the phenomenal thing about it. I could not put 3 of you guys together and get a definition for business architecture. We like to argue, we like to disagree on everything. I have asked, we're getting close to 2,000 architects that question, and it's a unanimous answer. So think about that, what that means. So the reason I'm asking these questions is that largely our organizations are not providing the political capital that we need to make this happen. They maybe, looks like you guys actually are actually stronger in that than other people. But the second message for you is, how are you spending your time? Because when I talk to architects, what they want to talk about is capability models, and is it 3 levels or is it 2 levels, or what do you do at level 4, and how do you map it to a value map, and how do you assess it, and are they nouns or verbs? Now that's the pressing question of the moment. Are they nouns or verbs? That doesn't matter. I mean, what you just proved here is that is not what's important. What's important is influencing the organization and getting on with it. Now, that's not just my opinion. This is research from Forrester, and if you'll look here at the top 3 things. So the question here is, what are the 3 most significant barriers to business architecture success? Look at number 1. Number 1, cultural political. Okay? Number 2, what is number 2 there? Lack of an executive champion, which is tightly tied to the cultural political kind of world. And then visibility and stuff. Now, I want you to remember, I want you to look at this last line down here. 85. Read the rest of that sentence. This is the respondents to their survey that failed at business architecture. Is that right? Unsuccessful. 85. Got that number? Hold on to that number. Because here's the second part of this question, which is, well, what are the top 3 success criteria for business architecture? And it's the same things. So you'll let that sink in for a minute. But here's the interesting thing. Look at the bottom. What's the number down there? 45. What is it, 40, 45? 49. I did the math this afternoon in the hotel room. That's 37% success rate in this study. They don't happen to point that out, but that's what it is. And what's the issue? The issue is politics, culture, all that kind of stuff. And it's not just business architecture, it's the world. So this is a really interesting study from, who is it, Booz and Company. And they went out and asked a whole bunch of executives about all this kind of stuff. And 86% of C-suite guys say that culture's incredibly important. Well, duh, I mean, we all sort of know that. The interesting part here is the next one, is 60% said it's more important than strategy. Back to my previous questions, what are you spending your time on? This culture stuff is really important stuff. And a whopping 96%, for those of you who are a little bit challenged, that's almost 100, think that they need to change. And the worst part is less than half of them think they can. Now that's some pretty amazing statistics to me, and I don't know, it speaks to me about what's going on here. Exceller, like most of you, we have a model for business architecture, and our model happens to be called strategy to execution, and it's kind of a model to go from strategy all the way through the process of capabilities and all that stuff. So it provides the structure you need to do it, and that's really good, and we're really successful at that. The problem is, once we walk out the door, what happens, and that's the next phase of this thing, trying to figure this out, is what happens is you're swimming in this culture and context stuff. It's all around you, you're trying to implement in this stuff, and if you're not careful, it just kind of fades everything out. It overwhelms all the mechanical things you're doing. So the best plans you have of building a capability model that's 14 colors and can be rearranged 3 ways and has 47 overlays, I mean, that's all really great stuff. But the fact is if the organization doesn't buy into that, if they don't understand the value of that, if you can't overcome that kind of cultural resistance, then you got a problem. And oh, by the way, there's not a lot of help. Here's what I discovered. There's 33,000 books plus out there on organizational culture stuff. Now, I haven't read all of them, but I've looked at a number of them, and here's what I see. What these books do, the first third of the book is what's culture all about and why it's so important. I think from the survey data you got, we all get it. It's important to us. The second third of the book is then talking about how do you organize what you see in your company to create some kind of cultural model, and usually it's a 4-quadrant matrix to dumb it down for executives so that we can I got a tribal culture here. And then the last third of the book is telling you how to change culture, which is totally ludicrous because nobody ever does it. In fact, some years ago, I was doing a whole bunch of bank merger work, and we were really struggling with a particular merger. We had already signed the deal. The boards of directors had already signed. The regulators had already signed. But this management team was not buying into this. I mean, it's a foregone conclusion, but they're not buying into this, and they're fighting us tooth and nail. And so we bring in this guy, Daryl Connor, who I remember very clearly to this day. And he, at that time, was a big organizational development guy. And to help us talk to these guys and figure out how do you get the stuff moving. And I was sitting next to him at lunch one day, and I have a psychology background. I'm kind of always interested in this cultural stuff and organizational stuff and leadership stuff. I said, so how often do you go in and change an organization's culture? And he says, oh, never, almost never. And I said, really? I thought that'd be your bread and butter. You're an organizational development guy. That's what you would do. And he said, no. He said, by the time I finish telling the CEO what it takes, get this quote, because this is verbatim, he doesn't have the stomach for it. These guys had a visceral reaction to, my God, you want me to do that? And so they don't do it. So the problem here is there's nothing there for you because it's all about how do you change culture, and most of us in the middle of the organization don't have much chance at changing culture. You can change the culture of your organization, 3 people, 5 people, 100 people, 500 people, whatever it is. You can change your culture, and you'll bump up against the rest of the organization a little bit, but you can do it. But you can't change the larger culture very easily from the middle. Most of my, So Edward Deming, Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast. We seem to have translated that for lunch, but here's what you see out there. You see executives, you see architects, you see senior men, you see all kinds of guys who look at this whole cultural deal like it's a foregone conclusion. It is what it is. You can't change it. Just suck it up, live with it, and they move on. And so it does eat their lunch. And it is more important than strategy because they won't be able to get their strategy done because they're just letting it lie there. And what I discovered somewhere way back is that's true, but only if you ignore it. If you decide you want to attack this problem and make it work for you, you can do it. Back in my life here, and kind of how I came to this, is in my corporate days, I spent most of my 20 years in management, and I was known as an organizational fixer. So my job was to move from organization to organization to fix them. And what do you think the problems were? Do you think there were process problems? No. There were people problems. There were culture problems. There were context problems. It was that kind of stuff. It wasn't about a new diagram or even a new org chart by and large. It was a whole different thing. And through that process, I got to actually, in 2 cases, really totally in effect, change the culture of those organizations that worked for me. One relatively small, one moderate. And so I've been doing this, and then I spent 10 more years consulting, 12 years consulting, and I consult with architects and strategy guys and some business leaders. And largely the things that I do I do all the mechanical stuff, but I realize I do a whole lot of this helping them understand culture and context and how they can be successful given the crazy place that they work. And I realized that I'd done all this kind of by the seat of the pants, intuitively, just talking and doing that stuff, but I really hadn't thought about how do you put this in a model and what do you do with this. So that led me last year to start to think about this, to say, well, I'm an architect. I should build a model, right? I mean, if you know something and you want to model it, you got to figure it out. Say, well, okay, let's build a model for this thing. I mean, let's just don't let this thing lie. So that's what I did. And so what I'm sharing with you is kind of half-baked. I'm not always all the way there yet. But what I started looking at was this culture thing, and what I quickly recognized is it's not just culture. It's also management context, it's structural context, and the one I'm really loving here, because remember I'm a former psychologist, it's a personal context too. But what you've got is you've got all these different contextual factors